Gets away from Kante, plays down the line for Suarez. 98 team of the year, Suarez.
Here's a big chance.
Ramos.
Suarez, what's he going to do? Tries to feed it back. Is that going to come to Ronaldo? Just trying to get a foot on that, maybe. Pull it now. The man that Bullock loves. Half turn there from Torres. Vieira back to Suarez on the finesse, and there we have it. The Bullock is in London. He turns around. He celebrates. The Bullock. He had a plan, and he's performed it.
You're listening to the FUT Champions podcast with Richard and Brandon.
What's going on? Welcome back to a brand new FUT Champions podcast, episode 17. We're on now. You're probably thinking it should be episode 1 because our last podcast was actually just over a month ago, believe it or not. I can obviously start the show with a big apology on behalf of that. Myself, Richard and Colin, we've been all over the world, literally. Colin's obviously been at a number of events of his guys. Obviously, 2 of them are at the playoffs coming up next week. Obviously, the 28th of May they do start. We'll be talking about that all throughout this podcast. And of course, apologies for myself and Richard. We have been jet-setting around the world as well, covering a number of FIFA E World Cup qualifiers, which of course have come to an end now, and everybody is looking towards those playoffs. The man, though, he's back, of course, Richard Buckley. Welcome back to a podcast which has been due for a very long time.
Yeah, as Brandon, and I feel as though it's the perfect storm for this podcast right now. We're coming off the back of the FIFA Club World Cup, plenty of controversy for us to dig our teeth into with that, and one man who loves a controversial topic, Colin Johnson. You're here, you're back. How are we doing?
Yeah, doing well. I'm excited. Obviously, we've had a lot going on in competitive FIFA recently for the past month. So many qualifiers. It's been hard to keep track of. I've been trying to keep the earnings tables updated, as you guys have kind of seen on Twitter recently, and trying to keep up to date. But man, they've put on a lot of events recently, so good to see. I think the other day on Twitch, actually, there was 4 or 5 events on at the same time on Twitch, which was pretty cool to see. So yeah, we're definitely we've just exited, I think, the storm of events.
And of course, from the top of the show, there was 31 or 32 qualifiers down on paper, or opportunities to qualify for these playoffs in Amsterdam. I've done a little bit of research. I know, obviously, you have as well, Colin, on the top earners. How many of those playoffs would you say Roman Fnatic were involved in? Because there was a lot of opportunities this year for players to qualify.
Yeah, it's been kind of interesting because I think, you have different types of qualifiers. You've had Barcelona, Manchester, right? And you've had kind of those main events where there have been so many spots up for grabs, but I think that some people would probably say were the harder places to grab those spots because getting top 8 at those events was pretty difficult. But then you have, the other events which are more like regionalized ones. So you're getting kind of a nice spread of kind of players coming out of the, I guess you could say the gauntlet of European and some of the top NA and rest of world players, but then as well you're also getting the best Polish player, for example, and you're getting the best player from the V4 festival and Tropsa and all these different events. So it's been a really interesting kind of mix of events. But our guys were fortunate enough to be able to come through Gfinity as champions and secure our spot a bit earlier than we might have thought.
And of course you're probably thinking as well, how long have we been waiting for a new podcast? We were in the process of kind of finalising the podcast. We kind of did a recap of Manchester, and then we were going to do a recap of the Gfinity, obviously with Colin and Ranners. We have, obviously we did the Life as a Pro series on the side. That we've got something special coming out the woodwork with a Roma player very soon for that. Obviously that will be announced. But, obviously congratulations to Colin and his guys. Richard, obviously, talking about that final very briefly, it was back in the 27th of April that final was. It was a pretty special one, wasn't it, for the guys?
Yeah, great final in general. They had to beat Team Envious in the semi-finals. Went down to a 90th minute Vieira equaliser from Zimmy to force extra time, and they picked Icevogel to the post in penalties. And then in the final, they took on Unilad. TAS came in for Unilad. Looking back on it, that was his opportunity to get a playoff spot. Just don't think he were warmed up. I just don't think he adapted to the game quick enough. Ranners beat him. He booked his playoff spot, and then Zimmer already beat Shells in the tournament. beat him again in the final. Roma 2-0 victory, and looking over the course of the tournament, I'd probably say deserved. I think over the weeks, because it's a weekly format, you don't really get lucky. You sort of get the best, the most consistent team. It's like people say it's very hard to win the Premier League, win a league, because it's over a longer format. It's not just over one weekend. Every single week, those Roma guys have got to come in and play. It's only a best of one, pretty much. Play a really good, like, high octane game. So a lot of people, before Gfinity started, said that's one of the more easier routes into the playoffs. Personally, for me, I would say one of the harder routes because it's over that long format.
Because obviously, I know Colin can relate to this now, and obviously we won't talk for this for too long. Obviously, there's been so many qualifiers after that as well. Believe it or not, April and May has been the kind of period where all the events have kind of concluded. But was it a factor that helped for you, Colin, that there was other organisations involved in that tournament that did have players playing in Manchester, did have players playing in a number of other qualifications? Your guys were kind of just focused on that, and that was kind of one of their main biggest opportunities to get the playoff spot.
Yeah, I think it even comes down to the argument that some people make about certain teams playing well in the league because they didn't make Champions League. Like when Chelsea or Liverpool like get super hyped in the league because they don't have that European football to kind of distract them, I guess, in a way. And I think they kind of use that as like a motivation, which I think you guys brought up in commentary as well a couple of times. But I think that they felt that they definitely deserved to be at Manchester. And that final and that semifinal and that quarterfinal was definitely the way for them to prove that, because that quarterfinal was, in my eyes, like a massive statement of like, we are good enough. These guys are about to head off to Manchester to compete in this event, but we're better than them. And we're at that level and we deserve to be there. So I think it was really a statement of intent going into the playoffs now as well, that playing against the high level opponents that we've played in Gfinity, that we're going to be playing a similar level at playoffs, and that a world spot is definitely the aim for all of our players. So.
And of course, for you, Colin, you've been part of esports for quite a while. How did it feel to get that win for you? Because you've been, I remember looking, not just you, but so many organisations looking for all the possible ways we can get to the playoffs. I knew how much it meant to you. Personally, you've gone into esports, one of the first people to really push a football club into esports as well. Did it feel like it was a long time coming for you guys?
Yeah, it's been a pretty tough year and a half competitively for us, because obviously I don't know if you can really say we've won an event before. We've never had a trophy. We've never had a piece of silverware in the past. So to do it in this fashion, in a place that had a crowd and had people watching, and was I think people grew to respect it throughout the season, and to win it in the way that we did, was such a crazy semifinal, and then to have the guys go out and play pretty well overall, I think, in the finals as well. And just, it really felt like it was earned. It really felt like the guys deserved it, because, I think Zimma and Ranners really wanted it from the off, and Ranners coming in as a sub, and the storylines were really valuable. But yeah, for me as well, it was really nice. I think the cameras caught a bit of that excitement and a bit of that emotion throughout the event. I definitely jumped out of my seat and ran up to the stage at one point. Made sure to congratulate ISFO as well, because I think he played in an incredible tournament throughout the season. But yeah, it felt really nice, because obviously we've never really had that feeling before, and it was obviously made the Roma and Fnatic people much happier to finally get that piece of silverware on the shelf. So.
And that was the Gfinity Elite Series. You got 2 spots for that. Recently just come off the back of the Club World Cup over in Paris. There was 4 spots available. You weren't there, Colin, so I'll come to you first. Me and Brandon were at the event. Have you got any takeaways from the event, watching from home? Obviously, we'll speak about the 2 issues that did arise at the event, and being very vocal on Twitter. I know Spencer FC has been extremely vocal with his opinions. Sure, me and Brandon will give ours, but for you watching at home, Colin, what was the event like as a spectator?
So I'll start with the good things first. I think as I think those are kind of being neglected a lot by the discussions that are being had. My first thing to say is incredible work by FC Brøndby to come out and repeat, because I think people underestimate how difficult it is to repeat win an event, as it doesn't really happen that often. Like the only other instance I can really think of is Dax winning ESWC like back to back. And for them as well to do it with a different roster, because you got to remember that was Marcusa, right, that won that for Brøndby last year. So to come in and do it with Fredberg and Østen, and we know especially how difficult it is in 2v2 in the way that tournament was set up, how hard it is to stay consistent and how hard it is to win, because you saw Hashtag go out and have a really good group stage and get to playoffs and lose in the first game. So it's incredibly difficult to win that type of event. I thought that it was really well produced. I think that Sky always does a good job. Club World Cup last year was probably my favorite event, maybe next to Worlds, in terms of production and how well it was handled overall. But of course, with the negatives that come along with that as well. Obviously the first one being the group stage situation with Unilad, Arte Virtual, and Schalke. It's really hard to give like an honest opinion, because I think everyone thinks about the injustice of the situation instead of what would we have done if we were in that same situation. Because I guess when people were kind of talking about it on Twitter, the question I would have asked is like, would Unilad have done the same thing if they were in the same position? Because I think that's how you have to deal with it, right? Like if you put yourself in that exact same situation, would you have played the same way, or would you have gone all out? Whereas if they would have gone all out and lost, they might have gotten grouped, right? So I think it's really, I don't think that it was like a conspiracy, as some people were claiming, that everyone was out to get Unilad. And I think one thing as well to say about Unilad is, how you avoid that kind of situation is you don't go 2-2 and 3 in the first place and expect to get out of groups. So I think that a team with Gorilla and Shells, like the narrative should have probably been they should have played better, because those two are better players than 2-2 and 3 in that group, and they definitely should have been able to get out of that group. And to end up being in the situation that they were in, they shouldn't have been in that situation in the first place, in my opinion. But I guess another opinion that I'm going to have to levy here is against the situation. I guess the other opinion I'm going to have to levy here is against a certain competitor who displayed some less than professional attitudes and actions at the event. I think we're all aware that there is not an exploit, but there's a game mechanic that isn't perfect at the moment, which is you are more vulnerable to conceding a goal after kickoff. And I think that many pros have accepted that. That's been everyone's been aware of it since Barcelona, when people were smashing tables and screaming about it from across the event about kickoff goals. So it hasn't been a secret. Everyone's been fully aware of it for the entire season. So I think players, have tried different things to fix it, to avoid it. Some people have found success defending against it. Some people have not found success defending against it. And this was the esports version of the game, so obviously it is a bit different than what the guys play online. But yeah, so a player conceded 3 in a row, and after he conceded the third one, he decided to get up out of his seat and essentially try and leave the venue. And I think there's been kind of two sides of the argument. The first one being he's a hero. He stood up for bad gameplay and for all the pros, and we're not going to take this anymore. And then there's the other side, which is he did that for himself. He was frustrated. He acted unprofessionally. He disrespected every single person in that venue, whether it be the organizer, the people on the production staff, the casters, his opponent, his teammate, the team that picked him up so that he could even play in that event in the first place. The game, the relationship with Sky Sports, I think, and I think some people decide to ignore that and decide to instead focus on the entertainment value of what he did. And I would probably fall on the disrespectful side. I definitely think that if any of my players ever did that, there would be some consequences, and that they definitely would be told to like sit back down. This is your job. You're a professional. You need to act professionally. And I think that there's a venue to talk about issues with the game, and it's not during a broadcast of a semifinal and one of the biggest events of our competitive calendar.
I think to lead straight into that, about that event, obviously, first and foremost, we were grateful to be involved, me and Richard. Obviously, we worked alongside Joe and Demon, obviously Laura Woods, Spencer, and of course Sky Sports, who again, there was criticism over another event in the past that Sky are involved in. I think that Sky are one of the best broadcasters involved in FIFA right now, and they've done a great job, and without them giving obviously this kind of esport the exposure that it deserves, throughout the finals day, it was live on Sky Sports Premier League football all day from like 10 a.m. till when it finished, and the millions of viewers we'll get from there, and it was broadcasted around the world via other alternatives. So first and foremost, it was great to see FIFA get even more broadcast and media coverage. Again, a completely better event compared to last year. We thought last year was good. The format, the amount of teams that tried to get into the competition, don't get me wrong, I know it was a very difficult qualification process, but the amount of teams that tried to get in and enter, I think it was about 150 teams, 140 teams, organisations that tried to get involved. Paris, unbelievable venue, every team had their own pod, looked after very well, food, catering, all the little important things for a player. But as you said, unfortunately one competitor obviously had that turn there, and unfortunately a few things were overshadowed throughout the whole tournament, such as Bromby winning back-to-back champions. As you said, 2 new players involved there, obviously Jesper Prang and Expect Sport, and now at Manchester City those guys have left. In came FeCWC and FIFA Fredberg, 2 Danish players used to play for Wicked Gaming, just had that kind of team mentality, that team drive. Obviously, as we know, with this competition you have got that obviously the aggregate scoreline, 1 game PlayStation, 1 game Xbox, and I think what did happen with the competitor obviously just look bad on the esport in general. You wouldn't really see anyone else doing that, and as you said, Colin, if something did happen, there would be punishments involved. He was on loan to a certain club, a certain organisation, and he had a lot of backing on Twitter, which really, if you look at the whole argument in general, it shouldn't have really had that backing. It should have been like, okay, we'll get a bit frustrated and stuff, but you're a professional at the end of the day. You have to deal with situations professionally, and to not ruin a broadcast or to not ruin an esport. But that's kind of my opinion on the matter.
I think personally for me, the way that I would look at it is though, if the player in question, Kurt, feels as though there has been an injustice, he's conceded 3 kick-off goals, it feels as though the game is against him, which a lot of pros, when things aren't going their way, they'll not praise their opponent and say they've done well. They'll decide to say that it's the game's fault instead. That's their personal opinion. That's not fact. If you look at something, everyone says that they want esports to be viewed as a legitimate sport. I said this yesterday on a live stream when they were asking for my opinion on the matter, as they were there. In the 2010 World Cup, Frank Lampard scored a goal which wasn't given against Germany. That ball went over the line. That is an injustice. You didn't see England storm off the pitch and say we're not playing anymore. They carried on. The player in question decided to stand up, decided to cause a scene, which for me personally, I just don't think you can't praise that. Yeah, it might be raising awareness of the kick-off, which doesn't need any more awareness risen to it. They've already tried to patch it in the patch notes recently, so they know that there is something there. EA, the developer of the game, there's no point every single pro coming out and trying to jump on the back of it and say that he's like a white knight of the FIFA community and that change is going to come behind him, because quite simply it's not going to come. We're already looking towards FIFA 19 right now. There's 2 events left from this year, the playoffs and the grand final. There's going to be no changes that are going to happen before those grand finals. It's highly doubtful. Just forget about it, move forward. You're in the playoffs and you've got another opportunity to get to the grand final. If he won the event, And them 3 goals, if he'd have scored again straight away from kickoff against FIFA Houston, he wouldn't have been complaining. It's because he were losing, and quite frankly, the person that he's against, FIFA Houston, is just very good at kickoff. I think he scored 3 against FUT Tom in Manchester. He scored a couple against Boras at the Club World Cup. He scored 3 against Kurt. He's just very good at kickoff. He knows how to defend it. He knows how to score from it.
Well, everyone else is, in the competitive team have different strengths to their game, whether it's, possession.
For example,
style of play.
Aubameyang with crossing. Yeah. He's very good from corners, very good from set pieces. You saw Zimmer score 2 free kicks against Salonius in Gfinity. If that's something that he's practiced, if he knows that he can make his player run over the ball and it's impossible for the defender to get in front of it, that's something that he's got to his repertoire.
I mean, every year there's something, right? Every year there's some kind of mechanic that that suits different players, and it's not a bad thing. If you think about other esports, for example, like League of Legends, there are certain champions that become competitively viable because of certain patches, and then certain players become, better players maybe because they're better on those champions. And in the same way, some years the game is based around long shots. Some years it's like maybe dribbling is a bit more overpowered. Some years passing is a bit more overpowered. And I think this year, like, passing, quick passing, that kind of stuff works sometimes. Obviously kickoff is there. There's definitely certain tactics that work in every single game. And I don't think that just because, Kurt happened to be on the wrong side of kickoff means that we should, fix the game to suit, to suit his desires and to suit what he's good at. And no one's sitting here saying, oh, Ustun, like, went out and won 6-0 in the grand final. Yet no one's talking about that either. The fact that he brought back a 3-goal deficit. Like, he is a good player, and he won the game fairly in my eyes. There was no injustice there. That was a player that lost, a player that was upset, a player that lashed out because he personally was upset. He calls himself the best player in the world, and he's never won an event. I don't understand how that works either, but maybe he can explain it to us on Twitter. But I think it's definitely a frustrating situation for everyone involved. But I think hopefully moving into the playoffs and moving into the grand final, it can be more about the FIFA that's being played and less about kickoff and less about the controversy.
And of course, if you listen to the podcast right now and you're thinking that's a bit negative or anything like that, this is just an opinion, over the weekend that we've been able to reflect on now. A lot of people came out and rushed into Twitter. They feel like maybe they had to get involved, maybe had to have an opinion. We've just sat back, thought, this is probably a better time to discuss it in a more natural, relaxed way. Obviously, us three, we care about the competitive scene quite a lot. Colin coming into it earlier than us, obviously from a different side of it. Me and Rich coming in from a commentary point of view, but we all do this podcast together. We all have the same vision for it, and hopefully we can continue to do that. However, of course, the main talking point right now is there's 2 obviously events left of the competitive calendar, the part of the global series. Of course, there's the playoffs and the grand final. We don't know when the grand final is yet, and we don't know exactly when it's going to be yet, but the main talking point is the playoffs. 128 players are there. This is what this main podcast is about, the build up for those playoffs. We're going to have a look at players we think are going to do well there. We're going to have a look at all the qualification methods. I think it's a good time to talk about the competitive structure, the format in general, because yes, there hasn't been maybe a UK qualifier on paper, or qualifiers in certain countries. There has been more tournaments. There's been a more chance for more people to get involved from all around the world. And what angle do we want to hit it off first, boys?
I think you said it perfectly. That it's global. You've literally got every single continent represented at these playoffs. I think you just look down the list of names, and it's a who's who of FIFA esports. I think one thing to note before we go into who's at the playoffs is who's not at the playoffs. If you were to name me 3 people from last year who were very, very good in FIFA 17, who may be the top 3 players, you'd say Rocky, you'd say Tat, you'd say Shells. All 3 of them players aren't going to be at these playoffs, which means in turn they're not going to be at the grand finals. There's a lot of names who have missed out this year, and it's not through lack of trying.
I think it's because the level of competition's gone up, and just looking at these qualifiers, as I said, I'm talking Manchester, Barcelona, you could say the majors from EA Sports. They're two of the FEWC. If you wonder what FEWC stands for, FIFA E World Cup. Obviously, Gfinity, they're the Elite Series, a US and an Australia event. We had football leagues, obviously, we had the EMLS, we've had the Virtual Bundesliga, the Virtual La Liga, obviously the Russian League, E-Liga Un, Eredivisie, the J-League, the Australian A-League. We've had a number of football leagues involved now, which is, even bigger than last year. We've had tournaments in Saudi Arabia. We've had, as I said, in Japan. And also we've got FIFA Online 3 involved as well, which is going to be interesting to see how those guys get on. Obviously over on FUT now. ESL, number of tournaments involved there. Of course, I'm not going to bore you with all the tournaments in general, but there has been so many more tournaments this year. It's safe to say, Colin.
Yeah, there definitely been a lot of opportunities. I think some of like the top level pros might say that there haven't been enough like open opportunities. A lot of them have been regionalized, whether it's a league or it's regionalized where it's just only players from this country or only from these select countries, which I think was kind of the idea, was to get as many nationalities as involved as possible, because it is the the FIFA E World Cup, so they're definitely trying to get the world side of that in there with as many nations involved as possible. And like you've said, you've had Australian events, you've had Saudi Arabian events, Polish events, all kinds of events all around the world. And I think you have enough, at least, of the top the top tier pros that have qualified throughout the year, whether that's through Manchester or that's through Barcelona, that it's still going to be an incredibly competitive event.
So let's have a look at the players that are involved. And obviously Richard just mentioned a few that aren't involved. Shout out to Jesper Pilmprang. He put together a kind of list. Obviously it still needs to be confirmed, looking at last chance weekend, and obviously visas come into play and a number of other situations with passports, etc., for who can make those playoffs. Of course, they're from the 28th of May until the 3rd of June. Obviously it's going to be a 3-day event split with a day in between. So obviously it'll be either Xbox or PlayStation. I believe it's Xbox first, potentially. PlayStation second. Obviously we'll find out that confirmed. But looking at the list first of all, let's look at the PlayStation list, guys. So from the top then, guys, let's look at a name that's involved again. Well, no, let's talk about someone that deserves a lot of talking. Ice Vogel got his place via ESL Germany. Didn't actually win that competition. Was involved in Gfinity, did well in that. Obviously didn't win that one. You could say he could have had a place via the FUT Champions Manchester, but obviously didn't need it then. Obviously lost in the grand final of the cross console, but nevertheless exceptional tournament. Was the PlayStation champion, and then we just seen him again at the FIFA E Club World Cup. Set up the game for Aero, and unfortunately MVO couldn't pull through in the end. But what a year for Ice Vogel. For me, he's probably in the top 10 players for this year. He's been incredible.
Yeah, and I'd say top 5 players, maybe top 3 players from this year. He's hitting his peak at the right time, and I think he's gonna be, if you're going to put money on a player to make it through to the grand finals, to finish in the top 16 on that PlayStation 4 side, I'd say it's a safe bet, personally. He always seems quite confident. He rarely loses. Like, if you look at the actual games that he's lost, they're few and far between. So he's going to take some stopping. I think one thing to mention, and Colin, you can come in on this as well, there's only one English player represented on that PS4 side.
Yeah, I think I would say it's like a cultural thing, though, to be honest, in my opinion, because I just think that there aren't that many English players on the PS4. But yeah, to talk about Icevogel a bit more, like, I think people underestimate how difficult it is to stay that consistent. To be, top 4 at pretty much every event you play in is incredibly difficult this year. If you look at other players that have won events this year, a lot of them have, maybe won that event, but then next event will go out in the top 16 or will go out in the top 8. But this guy just he does not get grouped. He does not lose in the round of 16, the round of 8. That guy's always in semifinals. He's always in finals. He's always in the discussion, and you definitely wouldn't even I can't imagine a world really where he doesn't qualify for the grand final.
That's one player obviously we've mentioned there. You've looked at obviously some of the UK players. Someone else to look at, obviously I've got the list in front of me now, 64 from each side, a few names to be confirmed still. Just looking ahead to a player that I believe has done very well now, Dami from Nordavind, a Polish player again. He's kind of in that area for me of players that, don't get me wrong, they've been involved in the FIFA scene, they've obviously played the game a lot, but now they're really starting to get that kind of top tier media attention where they're playing so well as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, I think his breakout performance would definitely be when he took on Aga in Gfinity, which you guys were casting over at the time, and I think it was 4-1 or 5-1, and that was actually when Aga, I think, was on some of the best form of his career. I think that was either right before or right after the ESWC win for him. So for him to come out and make a statement like that and to be competing at a similar level throughout the year has been really impressive from him. And I think, there have been a few players in that kind of vein where, weren't really known before this year. FeCWC would be another one of them, as well as Dami coming in. So and it seems like a lot of them have been coming from the PlayStation. You obviously had Tex come out on Xbox, and you've had MS Dasari, but even MS Dasari last year was tearing it up at certain points of the year as well. So it's nice to see more and more players kind of rising to that top tier, and people recognizing them for doing it as well.
Yeah, then you've got your so-called big hitters as well. Looking down the PlayStation 4 side, Nicholas, Agi, Marcuso. You're looking at
Stranger is scary.
Dito, Mo Bamiyang, Sihan can't be looked past. A very passionate player. I feel with Sihan, once he gets going and gets some momentum, he's very, very hard to stop.
On the same,
and I think the only player that you can even consider that's going to win it is going to be Zima. So that's just easier, isn't it?
Ooh,
I think because there is no cross-console final. With the playoffs, you get a PlayStation 4 champion and an Xbox champion, but it's all about finishing in that top 16. If you're going to run down that PS4 side and pick out maybe 4 names, Brandon, who would you be looking at saying they're nailed on?
Nailed on to be, obviously it has to be top 16 finish, as you said, to go through. Some of the names I'd say in there, I'm going to say Maestro from France. Again, one bit of his game that he kind of has been lacking is he's still a young player. It's probably the mental side of his game, but Sir Alex, a number of other French players as well that help him as well. I'd say he's got to be involved in the top 4. I'd say the Stranger should be involved in that. So obviously Maestro, the Stranger, and also I would go and look towards experienced players, maybe a Zimi or an Ivan Lapagna. New York City Chris is involved again, so it's a bit of a difficult one for me. When I get in situations like this, I panic and start picking more than 4 players. But I'd say definitely Maestro, definitely the Stranger. I'm going to throw in New York City Chris, why not? And a little bit of experience there, or I might just go the other way. You know what, I'm just going to throw in Dami as well, why not? I think a complete mixed bag of players.
I think for me, I'm not really going to go for the so-called big names, so I'm going to stay away from you, Nicholas, the people you expect to go through, but the people I think will go through in that top 16, I think Yimi has got a great shout. Very, very good player. Qualified through Barcelona, finished in that top 8. I think FUT Perry, I think he's very, very good on LAN. Recently beat Tex in the E-Champions. So I think he qualified through the virtual La Liga, I believe, a couple of months ago. So I think FUT Perry's got a little bit of a shout to get to squeeze into that top 16. I think Lev Vinken, representing Ajax, playing in Amsterdam, could potentially have a little bit of a backing from those guys. And then one more player who could sneak through. I think Honey Badger from FUTWiz. He always seems to get into that top 8, top 16 sort of bracket, but he's never really pushed beyond that. I think he'd beat Agi in Barcelona in the round of 32. So I would go Honey Badger as well.
Oh, so I get to pick last, huh? Makes my job a bit more difficult. No, I think looking at this, a guy who's been incredibly consistent this year, that people just haven't really noticed, has been Zizinho. From Brazil. He's been incredibly impressive. I think he's always, coming, top 2, top 4, top 8. So I don't really see him finishing outside of that. I think FeCWC has definitely convinced me that, he should be considered a much better player than I think he's been perceived in the past. I think he handled people at Club World Cup that, are very difficult to handle. And then I think I think Aga. I think this is where experience comes out definitely, and I think that he'll be a pretty safe option to go through. And then of course there's only one more player I can call out, and that is Zima. I think that he's the last 6 months have probably been the best FIFA he's ever played. We've been able to see that in Gfinity, and I'm really excited to see how he performs, because obviously he wasn't at Barcelona or Manchester, so I think some people are pretty interested as well to see how he handles the esports gameplay for the first time.
And of course there is another 64 players over on the Xbox side of things. It's safe to say that there's been a lot more PlayStation qualifiers than there has been Xbox, as you know, with the 23 last chance qualifying places compared to the 16 over on PlayStation. So obviously a 7-man difference there. But looking at the Xbox side of things, I know you mentioned about English players, Rich. There's a lot more on Xbox.
Yeah, there is, and pretty much all of them very big names. Unilag Gorilla, #Harry, Sean Allen, otherwise known as Dragon. You've got F2 Tex in there as well. Some of the English players represented. If I was just going to go straight in and name the 4 players who I think pretty much, I wouldn't say guaranteed, but I'd say expect him to be in that top 16. I find it very, very hard to look past Herozia with the way that he plays, possession based, wears his opponents down, waits for a mistake and then capitalises. So I'd be going with Herozia. I'd be going with Megabit. I think Megabit is always there or thereabouts, any tournament that he competes in. Looking across the board, looking down the list, I think MS Desari, extremely hard to look past him at the minute, playing unbelievable FIFA, just seems to dispatch anybody that he does come up against. And then the last player, I think PSG Fiddle. I think he's been the best player this year at PSG among their entire roster. I think he's carried PSG a little bit this year. Some of the other players haven't performed to their best. So I think PSG Fiddle will finish in that top 16.
Looking at my options for Xbox, I think there's a couple people that definitely stand out. I think Ryan is in some very good form recently. I think he's beat Gorilla in the last 2 times he's played him in the last 2 events, which obviously is never an easy task. And I think he's hitting consistency again at the right time, because I think he struggled a bit around like the beginning of the Gfinity season with some consistency in his gameplay, but it seems like he's kind of coming back into form. I think Goal Machine is another player that is kind of hitting form at the correct time, and I think it'll be pretty tough to beat him. He took some big scalps when he was in Manchester, and it's usually the players that can hit that hot streak and just ride it throughout the rest of the season are usually the players that I think are pretty tough to take down. Janos as well. I mean, the guy's he's been in Europe, I think, for a while now, and has been taking down people in Gfinities. He's been scrimming only European pros. I mean, the guy is ready. The guy is prepared about as well as you can prepare. And then I think the one guy that I think we might not even have mentioned if I didn't bring him up, but sometimes you forget that Rosek is like finishing top 2, top 4 at every single event he goes to, at Manchester and at Barcelona respectively, and the guy's just he's ruthless, especially on the esports version of the game. So yeah, those would be my top 4.
I think it's great that you've mentioned obviously Janos, a player that me and Richard say is probably one of the nicest guys in FIFA. He's one of those players that can compete over in the European side, just like a New York City Chris. But looking through that, for me, Marcus Gomes, a really good year for him as well. Good for him to be involved at this event. Rafsu, a player that he has played well. May not have hit the heights in every single competition. Won the Orange E-Ligue 1 over there. Got here via the last chance weekend as well. I believe obviously the Orange E-Ligue 1 was actually a playoff qualifier as well. But just looking through, obviously a lot more US players involved over on this Xbox side. Ix Danny as well. Not the best start to the year. We always talk about the game cycle, players getting better as we go throughout the year.
He always peaks this sort of time of year, though, doesn't he?
Yeah, and of course, Eredivisie there. And a player that I'm actually a massive fan of, Mayo from Transfer Market. He is not a bad player.
Yeah, I think Mayo's got a great shout. I think as well, if he does if he spars with his teammate Nicholas, it's not a bad sparring partner. I think a player from Hashtag United as well. We can't forget about Hashtag Ryan. I think he's been, in my personal opinion, the star jewel this year for Hashtag. I think he's hit some great form, and when he's playing at his full potential, I don't see a lot of people who can beat him.
But yeah, I think we had also spoken about bringing 2 more categories into kind of this evaluation now that we have these, finalists in front of us. I think the next one we were looking at were players that, may have had rough seasons throughout, or may have had, a point to prove through one manner or another. And I guess we just kind of wanted to look at some players that need to get to the grand final, like that they can't afford to let their season end here, because I think everyone needs to get to the grand final, but I think there are some people that, might have specific reasons, or, like I said, have had tough seasons. So definitely, are looking to prove themselves at this event.
I think you've got to kick it off with maybe, especially over on the PlayStation side. We'll go back onto the PlayStation side now. Obviously, just scanning through. For me, you've got to be looking at big names that you've got to be saying have got to be there. You've got to be looking at the likes of Mo Aubameyang. You've got to be looking at the likes of New York City Chris, for me. Players that have had that year last year to really get themselves in the scene, or obviously to show themselves at a higher level. To other players that you would expect to be there on paper, you would have to say an Aggie to be there as well. And then you have to go over to the Germans, and I'll say that man again, the Stranger. For me, they're 4 players that I think you've got to say have got to be in that grand final.
I think another option as well, looking down the list, Cody. I think he got some flack about the Stranger carrying him throughout the Club World Cup and throughout Club World Cup qualifying. And I think that if he wants to still prove, like he was the console Xbox runner-up last year. He finished 3rd in the world last year, and has not had a great season this season. So I think he has a point to prove. I think Sheehan as well has probably not performed as well as he would have liked to this season. Definitely, I think wants to step it up a bit this season as well. And then I think if you look at a few other players that have had like less than what they probably expected, would be Boris and Rain. 2 very experienced players, but I think 2 players that still want to prove that they're at that top level. Still, like I said, have points to prove coming into this.
Yeah, I think when you talk about who needs to get to the grand final, it's very much the question of if, for example, with Icevogel, no one's going to really remember Icevogel's year if he's not in the grand final. So I think Icevogel has to be in that grand final to sort of put the cherry on top of the cake, you could say, for this great year he's had. I think you're looking at the Germans. I think Mo Aubameyang has to be in that grand final. He's got to make it into the top 16 from the playoffs. A couple of other names, potentially, just looking down the list right now. I'm trying to think of players who you've not said, but I'm going to have to repeat it from what Colin just said then. Boras, I think you've got to be looking... he should be making it into the grand final in that top 16. And then, I've just seen a name who I don't think he has to make it into the grand final, but I'm just going to completely go off the cuff and say he's a dark horse to win the entire division on the PlayStation 4. He's not been said yet, and that's Liez from Montreal Impact. I think that the way that he plays the game, super possession based, drawing his opponent out and then just capitalising on any mistake. I think he suits himself very, very much so to the esports version, and I highly doubt a lot of the European guys have played against him before. So I would say watch out for Liez.
Didn't he? I think he was like a semi-finalist as well in FIWC, like 2015 or 2016 or something like that. So he has that experience at the top level as well. So that's a good shout.
Well, there's a few picks from us of players that we think should be at that grand final, kind of need to be. We're talking about contracts here at the end of the day. Will they be renewed? Will they be extended with their current clubs, organisations? Over to the Xbox side of things now, I think for me, you've got bigger names here of players that maybe not all of them have had the best year. They've had to kind of count on making big tournaments here. Obviously, Ajax Joey signed for Ajax. Question marks over whether he could be one to have to make that. There's so many names here you could be looking at. For me, a player that I'm going to leave in for you actually. It's an English player, F2 Tex. I know you mentioned him a little bit, Colin. For someone that you think should be there, especially after winning the Barcelona event. Obviously, a lot of hype behind him. Players like Dax, I think you got to look towards. You got to look towards a player like Kurt. He should be making there. Obviously, said he's the best player in the world. Needs to be making that final. And then for me, I'm going to say Ajax Joey as well. You know, a player that had a lot of hype around him. A very talented player. Can he go the full way and make that final?
Yeah, I think for me, one name just jumping off the page, Unad Gorilla. I think he has to make it to the grand final. Defending champion, if he's not there to even be at the grand final, to even try and defend his crown, you're asking questions. I think Megabit, there's been a lot of buzz about Megabit this year. 160 in November, plays both sides, got his qualification early to the playoffs, did it all the way back in Barcelona. That's 4 months ago now. He's always a threat. I think he has to make it through to that grand final. And then I think Ajax Danny, as you said, Brandon, I think he personally puts a lot of pressure on himself as well, because playing for Ajax, one of the biggest teams in FIFA esports, one of the biggest football clubs, constantly trying to improve. We saw that with the training day program that they did over 10 weeks, playing a different pro every single week, trying to improve, trying to get better, and it culminated in winning the Eredivisie. Can he take it one step further and finish in that top 16?
And I think the first person I would talk about would be Harry. I think from an organizational standpoint, he's definitely safe. I don't think he would lose his contract if he didn't make it to Worlds. But I think personally, I think he's kind of seen as kind of the backup to Ryan in some ways, and maybe skill level. And I think they're actually at a fairly similar level, especially when Harry plays his best. And so I think for him personally, I think it would be pretty big for him to make it to that grand final. One person that came through, and I think a lot of the people that you might say that need to get to the grand final, the people that came through last chance qualifier, because I think a lot of people kind of criticized the system maybe, or said that maybe, that wasn't as hard as getting top 8 at one of the majors, for example. So I think someone like Dragon, who has had a decent season, but I think definitely would want himself to be at the grand final. Former runner-up, losing to Al Basha, and I think he was standing behind Gorilla last year at the grand final. But I think he still is a player, and he still wants to be at that grand final competing. One other player, I'd say Tim Lotka, has had probably a pretty good season, but I think without the grand final appearance, it's not really complete, I guess you could say. And then I'm kind of going to come on to what you guys have said as well, is Danny and Kurt both need to make it, because I think Danny's a player that lives and dies with his success when it comes to FIFA, and I think he's had a really poor year this year outside of the Eredivisie, so I think making it there is going to be paramount for him. And I think Kurt, if he doesn't make the grand final, the abuse that he would get on Twitter, especially, would be unheralded, I think. So yeah, I think those are definitely some picks.
And of course, it's just clear to make that these are the players that, of course, on a to be confirmed list. Obviously, we'll get full confirmation of them, and you'll see them all online before it goes live. We've actually got a few ideas next week at the playoffs to try and create some content out there. Obviously, don't hold us on this, but we might do a live maybe in the day between. Obviously the Xbox or the PlayStation games to just reflect after half of the tournament, but they're just a few of our selections that we think, players that might do well, players that are maybe newcomers to the scene.
It's important to point out as well that it's no cross-console final, so it's just a PS4 champion and an Xbox champion in one name. Brandon and Colin, who would you, if you had £5, if I gave you £5 right now, who would you be putting your £5 on to win the Xbox side and win the PS4 side?
It's a tough goal, very tough.
Man, that is pretty tough. I'm not gonna. I won't talk about my players because I think that's bad luck to say that they would win it. But I think that the one player on Xbox that you have to look at would be MS Desari.
Ooh.
I think that the manner in which he won Barcelona is still fresh in the Manchester is still fresh in the memory, and I think that the guy is extremely motivated. I think that he has some very, very good practice partners as well, as you saw how talented the Royal was. at Club World Cup as well, and I think that he would probably be my pick at this point.
For me, I'm going off background of players performing at the big EA majors. Maybe not. Maybe some people don't always look towards this man. He keeps himself to himself at times on Xbox. I thought you were going to nick him, Colin. Nicholas Rajek. I'm going to throw him in there because he's fearless at these big events. He is literally fearless and plays some unbelievable FIFA. And as boring as it may sound, on paper alone, Nicholas 99 FC, that would be my PlayStation pick. The man is a machine, incredible. And what about yourself, Richard? Can we flip it on you?
I think on the Xbox side, I'm trying to think who's really starting to hit form right now. I'm also thinking as well, who's hitting form and also who is like someone who maybe might not have played against before. So I'm gonna go on absolute curveball. Qualified for the V4 Future Esports Festival. I'm going with Gavinho.
You love a wild pick, don't you? Idai Garabovic, and now it's Gabinho.
Gabinho on the Xbox, and on the PlayStation 4, I'm going to stick to my guns. I'm going with Liaz.
Interesting pick. Richard Buckley always loved.
Those are very interesting. I would say Nicholas, because I didn't get a chance to go on PS, but I would say Nicholas is just, I think, just next level. And as well, I think the only person that could really bring him down would be Icevogel on form.
And to flip this on the head again, a question from me. Let's say on each console, the best newcomer to the scene. Maybe someone that's just signed for an organisation this year, or maybe someone that is maybe not been well known, and now obviously they're doing exceptionally well.
I think two names spring to mind for me personally. I think on the Xbox it's Tex, and on the PlayStation it's Icevogel this year. I think they both had unbelievable breakout years, and either of them two could go on and win their side of the console. Two very, very strong players. F2 Tex recently signed that big deal with F2 Freestylers. I would say a lot more pressure on him right now. A lot more eyes on him after Barcelona. Can he deal with the pressure?
I think Lev Vinkin as well is a good shout. I don't know if he was. He might have been around last season, but not in the way that he's been around this season.
It's our talk point when we commentate. He won the a fan competition and played in a tournament there, and he's actually managed by Epsilon fully. Don't no idea how it all came together. Obviously, Fully was going to be competing in the tournament, but he didn't in the end. For me, Dammy, I know don't get me wrong, I know he's been around in the Polish scene for a while, but the way he's come in, really, he said that he wants to be known on the international level, to sign for Nordavind, obviously via the G50 Elite Series, as a draft player. And then on the other hand of that, on the Xbox side of things, I'm going to say Mayo at Transfer Market now. I'm a big fan of that man from Germany.
As well, I would, on the Xbox side, you could throw, I think, Dubs as well in from FUTWiz. Once again, I'm not sure if he was totally around last year, but coming out winning an event in his first competitive season with the FeCWC and being pretty consistent throughout the season is never easy, consistency, and he's really impressed me.
I think you've got to tip your hat to FUTWiz in general this year. I think Boras put a tweet up a little bit ago and said the way that they've developed their roster has been quite remarkable, really. They've now got a very stacked team. They've got two players at the playoffs. They've got Zelonius, who were very, very close on the last chance. You've got Tom Lees, who was extremely close as well. Picked up 39 wins on that last chance qualifier. So I think they had the most players in Manchester at that major event. I think it's only going one way for a lot of the teams at the minute, and that's going upwards.
Yeah, Dubs and Zelonius that's a scary, if that was a Gfinity team, for example, that's a pretty scary team to go up against.
Well, I think this is a great point, guys, in the podcast to kind of wrap up now. We spoke, down so many avenues of these guys, and more importantly, one thing that we want to say is, congratulations to 128 players. They've battled through online qualifiers before they could even travel to these events all around the world. Credit to EA Sports, credit to all these third-party organisations to make these tournaments and to come up with these plans. And of course the FIFA E-World Cup, all the guys behind that. Now we've got a massive global series. If you look back to when competitive FIFA started with the championships, the Berlin championships, and obviously we had the FIFA Interactive World Cup as we would known it, for both to be combined together now as the FIFA E-World Cup, we've definitely moved on leaps and bounds there. And just in a few words, guys, what have you made of the competitive year before we get to these playoffs? Starting with you, Richard.
I think it's grown massively since last year. I think you just have to look at the amount of tournaments that have taken place this year, and you can see that it's moving in the right direction. I'm just happy that everything is going as it should be at the minute. Obviously, with the last chance qualifier, there weren't supposed to be as many spots available as there actually were, but I think it gave pros that, as it's called, a last chance, that last sliver of hope to get in, and it created some great drama, you've got to say. Watching those leaderboards over that last chance weekend, seeing who made it in, coming down to like skill rating. So I'm very happy, and I think the playoffs will throw up some surprises.
Yeah, first thing I've got to say is incredibly proud of my team and how they've performed this year. I think it was a bit of a slog, but I think that, fortunately winning that event was really nice for us. But on a whole, I think it's been nice for example, the prize split is just a small thing that we don't even really think about or talk about that much. But the fact is that 200 different players have made money this year from the game, and at least like $1,000 or more from the game. Whereas last year, I think it was like 90, maybe 100 players made money from the game. Just from a financial standpoint as well, the prize money awarded so far this year has been 1.3 million. Last year's total prize pool, I think, was 1.4, 1.5. So this is even before we got into playoffs, even before we've gotten to the grand final. So we're looking at probably doubling our total prize money from last year, which is only showing growth. I think that you're seeing more players competing, more players coming out of the woodwork. I think you're seeing, I think early on in the game, people were like, oh, the pros are leaving, and it's like there may be a couple isolated incidents of that, but there are only more pros. Like I said, there's double the amount of prize money, there's double the amount of players that are winning prize money, and I think that the players that stick this out for the long run are, it's going to pay off in the long run, because I think EA is refining how they're doing this every single year. I think they're improving the way they're doing it every year. I think they're taking lessons from other esports like Counter-Strike, League of Legends, and kind of the more traditional esports, and are taking those lessons on board. And I think they're doing a great job. And I think that sometimes people need to stop piling on and thinking about, oh, what's happening at the moment, what's the one gameplay exploit in this one FIFA, and more so think about like the roadmap. Think about where does this end, what's the end game for FIFA, because I think we're not looking at FUT Champs for the next 10 years, for example. Like, I don't think FUT Champs will still be around in 10 years, but I do think that, the competitive scene in FIFA will be around in 10 years. So, yeah, I'm pretty proud of what they've done, and I think they've learned a lot of lessons from last year, and I think they'll continue to learn, as we all are, throughout, the course of this esport.
Well, there you go. You've kind of heard from all of us there about what we think of the competitive year this year just gone by on FIFA 18. Of course, it's still not over. Playoffs to come 28th of May to the 3rd of June. Remember those dates. Of course, it'll be live everywhere, and it should be a really good event. Grand finals to come as well. When will the dates for that be announced? Where is it going to be? And of course, next week we're going to try and create some content around the playoffs there, probably during the middle of the competition when there is that break. And we will be doing, obviously, an episode after the playoffs to obviously look at who's in the grand final. Obviously, 32 players will be there from 128. We won't be away for another month. Whether this is us hopefully getting back on weekly podcasts, I hope it is. I really do. Thank you ever so much if you have watched this all the way through, listened to it all the way through. Be sure to drop a like and subscribe. You can get us on Twitter at FUT Champs Pod. And as always, enjoy playing your weekend league, enjoy watching the playoffs, and we'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.
If you like what you're hearing, why not subscribe? Just go to @FUT Champions Pod on Twitter, drop a follow, and then you'll find all your subscription options in the pinned tweet. Oh, and also, while I've got you, why not check out this podcast's more casual older brother, the FUT Weekly Podcast, for in-depth reviews, Team of the Week rundown, content chat, and general FUT discussion.